Hi, I'm Walter Grayman, representing the Environmental and Water Resources Institute, that's EWRI's WDSA History Project. The purpose of this project is to document the history of water distribution system analysis. An important part of this project is a series of interviews with engineers, modelers, researchers, and practitioners who have made significant contributions to the field of water distribution systems analysis. Our interview today is with Dr. Jim Goodrich. Jim is an environmental scientist with US EPA and has been involved in water distribution system related research for over 30 years. Topics have included pipe breaks, water quality monitoring and modeling, water security, and contamination of public drinking water systems. This interview is being conducted on October 19th, 2015 in Cincinnati, Ohio. Jim, you started with EPA in the late 1970s while you were working on your PhD in geography at the University of Cincinnati. How did that lead you to your research in water distribution systems analysis?
Thanks, Walter. Yeah, actually I was a senior and I was about a week away from starting loading trucks at UPS when Bob Clark's group called. And Bob had an interesting group with an economist and a geographer. And I think I was the only one that interviewed for the position, or the only one available. So got started there as a senior. I was an intern, kind of like a co-op. And in Bob Clark's group, you know, he was really looking at distribution systems spatially, economically, and it was just kind of a unique little section we had to work with. And I never left. I stayed on through my grad school years and been with EPA ever since. But Bob was really looking to look at pipe break analysis. Can you do kind of a forensic approach and just see what you can do to identify why pipes are breaking, how do you repair, replace, rehab them. And like you mentioned, it was in the late 70s, and we physically would go out to water utilities and go into their back rooms back by the loading dock where the trucks were and go through their file cabinets and pull out their little 3x5 work order cards and just in notebooks just start writing down what was the work order, what was the address, what kind of pipe was it, just very manual, just writing it down. And we would see what kind of pipe repair it was, what was the cost for it, how many times you have to go back and visit it. And just reading the handwriting and seeing what these guys on these work crews wrote down for the cars is just really interesting. And we would actually just basically interview the guys that went out in the ditches. We'd ask them about how were the pipes installed, what was the bedding material, was it just rock thrown in over the pipe, or was it backfilled with sand, and every guy had a story, and every utility had somebody who just knew the system. And we would take that information back and start to try to transcribe that. And so we ended up with maps, city maps just taped on the wall. Or we finally got to the point where we took topographic maps. Being a geographer, we had to have the topo maps. And so we would just overlay these topo maps just all over the wall of our office, line them up, and just start transcribing the data. And we would develop our own distribution system network, just going off the road networks, and we would create our own links and nodes. And so there we are, we're standing on chairs with colored dots. And an orange pipe would be 12-inch, and a green pipe would be an 8-inch or whatever. And so we had these sticky dots, which was our demands, our nodes. And we had to keep replacing them. They kept falling off. And then you talk about, this was just pre-GIS days. We had plastic vellum. It was a translucent plastic that we would overlay these wall maps. And so each layer, these were physical layers where we're overlaying what kind of pipe break it was. Longitudinal, circumferential, or whatever, or what the pipe type was. And so we physically had our GIS where we're overlaying these different characteristics and get, oh, there's a cluster of this here. oh, that type of break is only happening on that size of pipe. And so it was just, we should have got hazardous pay, on government chairs. We probably, OSHA wouldn't approve of that. But anyway, we were standing on these chairs, overlaying these vellums, and just getting an idea, really learning the system at that level. And, we were late 70s, it was a lot of grad students, and we were disco mapping distribution systems. And so, we got to the point where we had a mainframe to work with. That was just pre-Apple IIs, and we were doing SPSS. Started doing a lot of regression analysis, and really started to get a view of what the characteristics were, what was happening, why were pipes breaking, and it broke down into an interesting parallel, is that we might get one set of circumstances as why a pipe broke in the first place. But then once a pipe broke, it exhibited different characteristics. And so it was almost like an epidemiological study of pipes, in that we could almost come up with an actuarial table that once a pipe broke, it would start breaking more and more for similar reasons. And so that got us into the idea of, well, at what point do you just get tired of repairing that pipe? Do you replace that whole stretch of pipe? Do you do a rehabilitation technique? And then we started looking at, well, all these pipes were installed at the turn of the century. Now you went to ductile iron or plastic. They have different characteristics. They have different failure rates. So it's that type of a just kind of iterative process that we went through, starting on with a very much of a hands-on kind of approach, where we just, almost pipe by pipe, what happened to that pipe. And then Bob came along and said, well, we want to figure out we need to know what's going on with the water quality inside the pipe. And so I was highly skeptical. I thought, understanding what's going on outside the pipe in a ditch is difficult enough, but then, how are we going to know what's going on inside the pipe, in that own little ecosystem? So, okay.
Interesting. It's certainly different than today, where we rely so heavily on databases, and if information isn't in the databases, it's not available to you. We worked together on several water quality field studies in the 1980s in water distribution systems. There's one iconic picture of you and Rolf Deininger sitting in a Connecticut hotel room analyzing fluoride samples from a large tracer study. Field studies are always sources of interesting stories. Can you recount some of your experiences during those studies?
Yeah, there's a few I guess we can tell, but that was actually a pump house, I think, wasn't it, where we took the picture? There's another iconic picture that I always use of you standing next to the map. I think it was the Cheshire system in New Haven, and had a map of you standing next to the map of Cheshire and tracing the chlorine residuals and the fluoride values and time of travel. Those days of doing those tracer studies was kind of like, just kind of having all these balls in the air at the same time. And we got to go all over the country. We were in Northern California, I think Novato, North Marin, Schofield, North Penn, New Haven. Actually, for all the studies, I don't know if we even did some tracer studies in Cincinnati. We were kind of scattered about. But it's really neat now looking at the EPA Net website and seeing these schematics of these systems, and those were the ones that we did the initial studies on. These tracer studies, we were looking at fluoride, chlorine residual, DO, ORP. Basically, most of the time we just turn the fluoride off and start chasing the front. It was 24/7 kind of thing. And then once the fluoride was gone, we turn it back on and reverse the process. But before we went into the field, there was an awful lot of work, and we used, I guess, the model that you and Dick Males created, WDSA. I guess that was the father or grandfather of EPA net, or?
Yeah, well, that was the hydraulic model that had been developed by the Corps, and then we put a water quality model on top of it.
Right.
And it was the predecessor to the EPA net.
Yeah, so I would run that over and over for the system we're going to be working on and get an idea of where do we need to sample to catch the front and how often. So I guess even at that point in the early 80s was, kind of where we're at now with a lot of the tools out there that's being used. So, but I think one of the studies, we were in Northern California, and Bob Clark and I had been in the laboratory so much that the lab manager finally kicked us out. I don't know if she was sick of us or we were in the way or whatever, but she said, go see some sites or something. It's just, so that was a nice place to see sites and take a break. We one time we were in North Penn doing some studies, and on the way there I was getting a cold on the way there and got laryngitis, and I think I spent the entire week, and I don't know if the folks at North Penn heard me talk at all. That was probably one of the more quiet trips for you. But it was also, I think it was that same trip that the communication from the community that we were going to be out running around at all hours of the night taking water samples, I don't think that word got out. And so I remember Bob and I were taking samples at a faucet in the backyard of a house about 3 a.m. and the police showed up. So the homeowner wasn't too thrilled that I guess we made their pipes rattle or something in the middle of the night. But we didn't do any jail time. Didn't get shot at or dogs biting us or anything. But so that was, and then probably still the same trip. We were doing fluorides on a sidewalk in front of a 7-Eleven. We set up a card table. We've got just like that picture, we got our fluoride bottles set up, and I guess it's not good for business if somebody's doing something like that in front of your business. So I think the guy set us up in the storage room of a 7-Eleven. So it's, middle of the night, mid-morning, doing fluorides in the storage room of 7-Eleven. But, at least we had beef jerky and slushies and all that kind of good stuff to go with it. But it was, the studies there, we did several smaller parts of New Haven where we were looking at tanks. We had people in boats, in storage tanks. We had them rolling around doing cross sections of finished water tanks. We had guys climbing all the way up to the top of a tower of a tank, probably 6-7 stories in the air, trying to sample the water inside the tank. And it was those studies that we really kind of got a feel for short-circuiting in tanks and dead zones, and really kind of coming up with the idea that the chlorine residual, the difference between the water column and the pipe wall, that we're expecting chlorine residuals to be at certain levels, and they're not there. They're just disappearing quickly. And once again, it was that iterative process of doing the tracer studies, running simulations, what we were expecting and what we're getting in the actual. And so that was just a great time. And I was just starting out in my career, and I guess I didn't realize that not everybody gets to do that kind of stuff. Just having such a group of people around doing these studies at this area level is just it was just really an incredibly fun experience, and one that was challenging, and it was just a really good time. And I guess we did enough of those studies that we got to the point where we could order for each other at a restaurant. We knew what each other was going to get, so it was a good time.
The other area, in the early 1990s, you were heavily involved in investigating several water distribution system contamination events in Kabul and Gideon, Missouri, among others. Can you talk about some of the modeling and analyses that were used in those studies?
Yeah, the Kabul study, I think, was really one of the first ways that we validated the water quality modeling. It was a forensic sense. It was after the impact, and it's really kind of a precursor again to the homeland security issues that we're dealing with today. And we were working with Ed Goodrich, Kim Fox, the Centers for Disease Control, and the Kabul situation happened. We were out there, just weeks, days after the event, and we're just mapping the network on the fly, trying to calibrate the tank levels, how they're operating their tanks, and overlaying the illnesses, where people became ill, where did people die, what was the onset. The dates of when these things happened were very critical. And so we just, using the water quality model, we were just really validating, I think, the use of it in this sense. And so there are different scenarios we ran. There was a dairy in Kabul that was linked to the drinking water system. Was there a cross connection? Was that a place where, since it was E. coli 1057, was the dairy responsible? Around the town, it was a cattle area, and was runoff an issue. It was a groundwater source. The topography, it was a karst topography where you had sinkholes. Theoretically, you could have a lot of runoff getting quickly into a well. There's extreme cold. Lots of main breaks, meter replacements going on. There was a history of combined sewer overflows, the sewer pipes in the same trench with those drinking water pipes. So all those scenarios were run. And what was really interesting was linking Ed Goodrich's knowledge of disease, infectious doses, and it was a real good reality check for water quality model, because we had to come up with what is the initial dose, 10 to the 9th organisms. What's an infection dose? What's enough to make somebody sick? Could that reach the tap? And so with those scenarios, we were able to overlay where contaminated water was hitting those places where people became sick. And so I think just having Ed there and kind of merging the engineering, the geography, and the microbiology, it was just a really important event for the water quality modeling.
In recent years, you've been involved in the water security area, and in particular the nexus between water security issues and routine water quality issues in distribution systems. Have you found some compatibilities between those two areas?
Yeah, I think definitely. I've already alluded to the work done in the late 70s and 80s that had gone on with some of the forensics, tracer studies, the modeling, where to sample, how often to sample. Those really made it possible that after 9/11 to quickly set up the Homeland Security research program within EPA. And the focus of the last 10 years, kind of building on that early work, really has grown those tools. And I do think they have application for daily regulatory compliance, O&M decisions, just how do you operate your system routinely on a daily basis. I think all that has come full circle now, that the work that was done early on, that was ramped up after 9/11, I think is now spreading back out into the industry. I think it's probably unlikely that a lot of water utilities could implement a lot of these models, online sensors, just for the hopefully low probability of a disgruntled employee or a terrorist attack. But I think it really can be applied judiciously just for the daily operation and monitoring operation of a utility. I was going to say the models that have been done in Homeland Security, you'll probably be talking more about models like Canary, TIVA Spot, the SCADA, linking real-time distribution system data to hydraulic water quality models. All those can be linked in both a forensic approach and looking back as to an event, where an intrusion might have occurred or a water quality problem, whether it's just a pipe break or a cross connection or a low pressure situation. It can be, these tools now can be to look back as to where did something happen. It can be done in real time now as to how do you mitigate the problem? Where's the best place to flush a system so you're getting the bad water out and not spreading it? And then you can also look forward in the future for asset management. Where are your weak spots in your system? Where are you less resilient or less reliable? Where do you put your efforts to make a system more redundant or to make it more reliable in the future? So I really think that the tools that are coming out now with Homeland Security can be diffused into a daily routine operation.
You've had the opportunity to work with some of the true pioneers in the water supply area, such as Ed Goodrich and Rolf Deininger, who are no longer with us, and Bob Clark, who is still actively with us. Any recollections beyond those that you mentioned that you'd like to share about them?
Well, Ed, that was really critical, I think, working with Ed. He was just a pioneer in the microbiological world. And I think working with him on the engineering side and geographic side, linking the models with the microbial issues in Kabul and Gideon, I think it just gave real legitimacy to the distribution system modeling and making it a useful tool. And not being a microbiologist and having Ed in the mix there, we had engineers, we had the microbiologists, we had geographers. I think it was just that whole kind of approach that we used. I just thought that was really critical to the whole watershed, the water distribution modeling and its use, both in a forensic sense and just knowing about your system. But Ed was, I guess he was legendary in his field, but just having him work with us, I think it was just really critical to the whole area of the distribution system modeling. Rolf was just a joy. I mean, he was such a initiator, doing new things. It was just fun thinking back on everything that Rolf did. It's because of working with him that I got to see my first Apple II, a Lisa, a Commodore. We were putting little chips into the tops of these Apple IIs to give them 16K more memory. Rolf had these glasses with lights on them, so you could be working on a map or working on the PC. And he's just really an innovator. And we did some of the first projects with remote monitoring in the distribution system. We're trying to sample water in a tank, and he's got a fluoride monitor or a chlorine residual monitor on wheels. It was like a little shopping cart he had, and we're out in the field, and he was just a real innovator. And I think one of the first studies we actually put in Washington, D.C. distribution system. We were monitoring fluorides and chlorine residuals, and when the World Wide Web first came out, he was there. And he was just a real joy to work with, and always innovating, never stopping. He was just really one of the good guys. And then, Bob Clark, he was the first guy who ever hired me. Worked off and on for him with years. I still have flashbacks of red ink all over my manuscripts from where he was giving me edits. So we had to hide the red pens from him. I know his daughter was into swimming, and having my daughter swimming, I know there's about 3 minutes of action crammed in about 7 or 8 hours in a swimming pool. And so I know Bob did a lot of writing in the bleachers on weekends while his daughter was at swim meets, and come in Monday morning, we'd have entire manuscripts that he's drafted or rewritten of ours. And so just tireless efforts from Bob, just always thinking, and just really, I guess I just didn't realize, that guys like you and Dick and other folks within the distribution system community, that we really were starting something new at the time. And it was just a really good thing to be a part of. And so it's still continuing now. It's spread out, it's diffused, and I think it was a really good place to be at the time.
Any other thoughts that you'd like to share with us about some of your work in the past or what you see happening in the future?
Well, it's the fact that it's just all kind of come around. Still a lot of the same issues with the size of the databases, how quick computers are running, enabling us to do more. It's just, the way it's just melded engineering, geography, microbiology. It's just, I just really think it's just really an area that will continue to grow. It's been an interesting set of folks that have been involved with it, and it's just been nice to be a part of it.
Thank you very much.
Okay.